So, Amy Wu, thanks very much for coming on for joining us and searching for Mana. Amy is obviously the head of ventures, M&A, gaming at FTX, where she's sort of recently joined over the last sort of 8 or 9 months. Previously a partner with Lightspeed, so really sort of top tier venture capital fund. Across those two mandates, she's backed the likes of Yuga Labs, Aptos, Near. We've obviously had Ilya and Mariek come on. Lightspeed, the likes of Webull, and interestingly FTX as well while she was a partner there. Before that, she operated, she's with Discovery as an exec there, sort of CFO, NewsCred, Insight, a few other sort of names in there as well. So highly prestigious career in that. Amy, thanks so much for joining us. Yeah, just wanted to check in. Obviously, sort of in the Bahamas with FTX most of the time. Would be great to hear about how it's all kind of going.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on the show, guys.
Pleasure.
Yeah, moved to the Bahamas at the beginning of this year. Actually, I think like January 3rd from San Francisco, and then previously I had been living in New York City for over 10 years, actually, with a brief like year and spent in Singapore. Yeah, it's been a change in lifestyle. I would say, every day the weather's like 90 degrees, but we at FTX we honestly spend most of our time in the office here. It very much is like an in-office culture, and especially in these markets, we are grinding. So lots of time in the office.
Can imagine. Not too much time on the beach.
Not too much, I would say. Although the Bahamas is a great place for our partners and friends to come visit us because and spend some time on the beach. It's interesting. Like I'm actually in a phone booth right now, in our office, but we have these small we call kind of like hacker house kind of vibey buildings that we call huts here in this large parking lot. And there's like a few dozen of us crammed into a pretty small space. So, I sit probably about 10 feet away from Sam and Ashad at FTX. So like we're all kind of up in each other's spaces, but it's really great, to just be able to reach over and ask question with anyone. Yeah, we're kind of embracing that office culture here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it must be such an easy sell into all your sort of clients and partners to get them out there. I guess just in terms of sort of, obviously really interesting time within the crypto landscape at the moment, obviously in
Hmm.
a little bit of a bear market. But sort of more crucially, how it's all going with FTX, one of the more animated, sort of dynamic sort of businesses, I guess, within the space, very active. Like, how's your current position there? Like, how are you enjoying sort of working on this side of the table now with FTX, having been an investor previously?
Yeah. So I've spent probably half my career as an investor and half as an operator. And really at FTX, I'm able to do both. And it's a pretty rare opportunity. And so it's been amazing. We've been very busy on the investment side. So FTX Ventures, we're a $2 billion fund and we've deployed, we're going to deploy close to $1 billion in the year one. And then, on the FTX side, I also spent a lot of time in M&A and a number of our partnerships, particularly on the consumer internet side. And so being able to really get my hands dirty and actually be working with building products alongside our partners and also just with our core business, while also looking at investments in potential acquisitions, both for FTX and for ventures. It's allowed, I think it allows me and it allows a lot of us here to have a very holistic view of what's happening in crypto. There's so many different aspects of it. There's CeFi, kind of like the interplay with traditional finance firms, and a narrative there around when will like really the trillions of dollars of assets and TradFi start coming more so into crypto. Then there's like what's going on in DeFi. That's what's going on in consumer internet, which includes gaming, NFTs. There's like the narrative around stablecoins, and then of course there's like the volatile markets. We're in bear market right now, although there's a bit of a rally the last couple of months. Lots of speculation around how long that lasts, what happens after the merge. I would say, never a dull moment really, and we think about a lot of these, pretty much like across the board.
Amy, when you're thinking through that with the team, how are you doing that? Like, what type of systems are you using to be logical across all of that macro and then come out of it making those type of big impact decisions?
I was gonna say Slack. As in, like, I mean, the decision making here is very quick, right? And people hold a lot of knowledge in their heads, and so, like, a lot of people's areas of expertise are called on when we're making large decisions. People really are diving deep into certain areas. Certainly, not everyone is an expert in all of them. In fact, I would say most people are an expert in a couple, but like bring out all that expertise together is what allows us to make decisions quickly. And we're able to do that pretty effectively when we're in person, but also just, like on Slack, where we basically have like debates all day long on certain decisions.
And how big is the team that's making those decisions, Amy? I'm imagining it's a bit smaller than it was at Lightspeed.
I mean, actually, it's larger. I mean, so FTX is about 300 people today, and which is, I think pretty small compared to some of our peers. And everyone has access to these Slack channels, and so I think like a lot of probably like people who are participating in the debates usually have expertise in a certain area that we're debating, whether that is payments or KYC, and sometimes even like issues around environmental sort of decisions that we're making, and yeah, across the board. But I think like because like the Slack channels are quite open, you're able to accrue knowledge across the company.
This sounds like a DAO.
The difference, I would say, yes and no. I would say, like, interestingly with a DAO, there's a little bit of like sometimes there's actually information asymmetry. Sometimes I think well-run DAOs like actually do have a pretty publicly available data, and also in terms of how the DAO treasury is essentially given out, like it's fairly public, right? But I think in terms of decision making, it's not. It's decision making is not democratic. Decision making is done very quickly with like a handful of people with subject matter expertise ultimately in that area, and will also take responsibility for the consequences of those decisions.
Very cool. And you obviously sort of touched upon, we're seeing sort of crypto rally a little bit over the last couple of months, but the wider macro sort of trend of the market just being a little bit in the midst of a bear market, let's say. Are there any moments there where you're starting to sort of doubt? You're obviously somebody who came to crypto quite early. You're one of the first investors, I think, to sort of really immerse yourself in the Discord community, and really obviously are long-term, very long on crypto. I just wanted to get a feel just like a personal level. You see sort of the markets go up and down. You see sort of what's happening with the likes of Celsius and 3AC and various other sort of things kind of go wrong a little bit. Is there ever a moment where that sort of bullishness and confidence in the space starts to dwindle?
I think on a long-term perspective, no. Definitely not. On a long-term basis, this bear market already feels very different from the last one in terms of really like not having like a decrease in like an interest in builders in the space, like building playing around with the design space of Web3 and blockchain. That's very different in the last bear market. I mean, one can argue that maybe we're not as far into it yet. I don't think that's the case, where people actually just stop talking about crypto, right? Like I think like despite the volatile markets, actually more people are talking about it now. And so you see this like next rung step function of maturity, and you can start seeing like perhaps the next rung or maybe the one after that being like more mainstream adoption, and then at some point more TradFi like participation, and then over time it becoming more of just a part of this kind of like mainstream technology adoption. It kind of like orders of magnitude of more maturity than we are right now. That just is becoming more clear for us. Now in terms of like short term and medium term like price volatility, I'll be honest, I thought things are gonna be worse before like this like bounce back. And so I mean you just like can't predict it, right? Because I mean like there's concentrated holdings, like sentiments impact, but also we have like the macro environment as well. We have a large amount of overlap in investors between like crypto and like, for example, the tech industry. And so what's going on there, which is more impacted by macro trends. So yeah, I think the short and medium term is like harder to predict.
FTX has certainly emerged over the last few months as probably the prominent player to look at mergers and acquisitions. Why has that been the stance?
I believe it's because, we have been very prudent and disciplined with our capital. As a large exchange, we are fairly profitable business. And we also have kind of sister funds, right? Pools of capital to invest in as well. Depending on whether the acquisition is really from a more of like a private equity style investment or a strategic one for FTX. And so we had the capital. And then at a time when a lot of similar players, I would say, were pulling back, I think Sam has always been more risk on and a more clear-headed view on, I think, risk-adjusted probability of sort of returns, and also kind of like a thinking through like, okay, what are the impact, for example, in terms of stemming contagion. This is like a theme that was coming up a lot, right? And that contagion is as much about confidence as it's about actual like bankruptcies. And so, and the ripple effect that has towards like a regulator's stance on an industry. And so he just is able to, I think, see that with a more clear mind. And also because like, he has capital that is more flexible than a fund with LPs. He's able to do investments that others can't in these times, right? And so I think for a lot of reasons, he's able to lead investments and acquisitions in companies where others were not able to, and the industry is taking notice.
Yeah, in terms of the narrative you see, like even just on Twitter and various sort of social media, like sort of Sam, almost single-handedly sort of keeping crypto afloat over the last few months or whatever, slightly sort of clickbaity titles, but still, like, and then compare that with Coinbase and how they've seen the market and how they've sort of behaved. It certainly seems quite interesting approaches sort of being taken there. And I just wanted to get your feel on like working with Sam, Amy. Like, you're obviously formerly an investor, sort of in FTX, worked on that side when you were at Lightspeed. Now working with him, sitting very, very close to him, as you were sort of saying that. Like, would love to get a feel for what that's like.
Yeah, I mean, he holds a very high bar. I mean, we, all of us who work with him and for him, kind of bring it every day from like an intellectual rigor perspective. He's very much into being first principles thinking. Like, just because 100 people have done it a certain way before doesn't mean we should. Like, we should always think about it from a first principles perspective. He also makes a lot of decisions on like this, like, again, like probabilistic spectrum, right? Like, what's the probability that XYZ might happen, that we lose our investment entirely, that that we make our money back, or that we maybe like 10-20x like this investment? What's one in which if things go right on this product decision, like we could potentially add $10 billion of enterprise value to our company? What's the probability of that? Like, I think these are, he's a trader, right? And there's a lot of the co-founders and others of the company who are as well. And so that is essentially like a framework of thinking that really pervades our the company. And I mean, I've learned a tremendous amount like working with him. I decided to join FTX because, I mean, of all the founders that have ever had the honestly, like, the honor of meeting in my venture career, I would say that he's honestly the most brilliant like decision maker that I have met. Like, from like speed and also just like intuition, kind of devoid of like emotional bias, I would say. And that's been incredible to learn from.
So thanks for kind of setting the scene and talking through the landscape, the very nice beach landscape that you never get to see right now, Amy, afar from huts where you're making calculated decisions. Could you take us back and really set the scene for us in the audience in terms of where you got some early experience, exposure, and start to really think through who you might be in your career, please?
Oh, wow, that's a really interesting question that I haven't thought about in some time. But I think probably my my second job after college was at Insight Venture Partners, which is now one of the preeminent growth equity funds, based in New York. Was founded by Jeff Horing, who's still a great mentor of mine today, and I think was the first person who I talked to actually after I had gotten an offer from FTX from Sam, and that was definitely the most formative experience I had because Insight has this culture of hiring people almost directly from college and essentially just throwing them out in the deep end and having them cold call, figure out how to cold call, CEOs of very large companies. And I remember at the age of, I think like 24, Devin Parekh, one of the most senior managing directors there, trusted me to be a board observer on JD.com, who now is I think like the third largest e-commerce company in China, or one of the top. And I think there's just this like culture of trusting young people with a lot of responsibility, which then brought like young people to, I think, like perform at their absolute best. And I think like not everyone not everyone made it, but the people who really like thrived in that kind of challenging environment, it left an absolute lasting impression and also gave us a lot of life lessons that I carried on for the rest of my career. Like this idea of like, you know what, I might be 23 years old, but there's actually like people might say I'm too young to do a lot of things, but actually like that's just like a artificial barrier, and there's really nothing that we can't try to accomplish. And Basically, like for example, my current CEO Sam takes that to the nth degree. I mean, accomplishing what he has done at the age of 30, and that mentality has really been pervasive across like FTX as well. Basically, people are not judged by their resume or their prior body of work, but actually the contributions that they are actively making at the company.
It's really inspiring, but that tends to come from a minority of individuals who've had some type of outlier experience to give them, the tools to do something so impressive at 23, to take the responsibility on, to be so ambitious, to step up. There's a lot of people who wouldn't do that. So if I could ask you to go back even further to kind of explain what type of environment you might have been in, or what inspirational scenarios or figures led to that.
Gosh, I mean, I've always been the toughest critic on myself. Growing up, I was actually a concert pianist, and so I had a very unorthodox childhood, actually practicing piano, 46 hours a day, and being on the competition circuit and touring kind of around the world. And I remember at the age of, I think when I was like a freshman in college, or sorry, a freshman in high school or something like that, I was I had the chance of getting very close and rooming with actually one of the best pianists like of our generation, this woman named Yuzha Wang. And I think at a fairly early age, understanding what like genius looks like, and also like of what the bar could potentially be for a specific craft. And that was, I think, like both like humbling in terms of like, wow, it's really important to know what one can achieve and what can't. And in the areas that like one is like actually potentially like at the 1% of, like to really lean in there. And if I'm at the 50 percentile, I'm really never going to be world class at a particular skill set, whether that is like negotiation or in my case like mental math. Constantly tripping up on that, and really being kind of like very self-aware about that, but also inspiring oneself towards like the greatest like one can be. And so yeah, I think like I've always found a lot of this drive to be really internally driven for myself, like holding that bar to be very high. Also, like as a female, having always been in very male dominated professions, I've always felt like this like pride, but also like responsibility, and kind of showing others what can be done, like, but also the hard work that it takes to get there. I mean, I think I've probably worked 100 hours a week my entire professional career to date, and like will continue to. But it's something that I absolutely love. And yeah, I think some formative early life experiences in a competitive setting, naturally being a competitive person, and then finding culturally, like from either a fund or a company perspective, like-minded people to work with.
Just a couple of things. So when you were this concert pianist touring, I'm sure that in most piano halls you were number one, and then you get.
I'm good, Lloyd. I'm a good piano player.
I'm terrible, which is By the way, my mum's ambition when she was, when she found out she's going to have a son, was that I'd be a famous pianist, and she tried her best.
Didn't have I got grade 1. I think I got to grade 1 piano.
I love it.
Yeah,
something you have for the rest of your life. It's quite, relaxing.
I was a prodigy. Yeah.
Amy, you get to this scenario where there's then this, person who goes on to be a generational great. What did you see? Did you see that there was no way to be at that level, and then you walk away from that and go into a traditional career? Or did it inspire you, or why does the story not carry on with you being, a professional pianist?
I mean, truthfully, yes. One of my revelations was, wow, I will literally never be a fraction of this talent. And it is a wonder to behold, but also extremely humbling. And given kind of like how the distribution lies, like as a classical musician in terms of making a living, probably doesn't make sense for me. And so pivoting, like once I got into college around that. So maybe I was pragmatic even when I was like a lot younger, but I think it came along with an equal amount of just like of appreciation for brilliance. And so, I've always wanted to work with people I've just been absolutely inspired by, and work for people I've been inspired by, which whether that is like Jeff Horing at and Devin at Insight, or Ravi Matre at Lightspeed, and David Zasloff at Discovery, Sam at FTX. I think I learned so much from these people, and I become like better at my own, sort of role by learning from them.
The skill that you've described in two of those, now a mentor and a person you work with, but a leader, sounds a lot about decision making and first principle considerations and probabilities and all these type of things. What are you working on at the moment so that you can be as brilliant at what you're doing as possible?
I think, I spent most of my career at this point as an investor. Even at Discovery, a traditional media company really thinks about it as like portfolio management, right? And deploying capital into a portfolio of assets. So it's not dissimilar in that sense as well. And over the years, you grow kind of like muscle memory around different signals, whether they might be macro environments that impact what you can't do with capital, entry and exit valuations, to people. Like, is this the right group of people, the right organizational setup of people in order to actually execute on what you potentially can execute in a certain market position? And then crypto, these cycles are so volatile and so much faster that you're actually learning even faster. And so trying to bring all of that together in helping FTX make investment decisions for the most part has been what I've been really focused on. Because we have a lot of capital, but it's absolutely finite, and making one investment or one acquisition might mean we can't make another. And so it's all about trade-offs, and also as we look out at where, who we want to be and who we don't want to be in crypto and beyond crypto, because now, I mean, it's on the financial app side, we've also launched equities, and there's a long kind of tail of like products that we could launch and what we want to do. These are all decisions that we have to make carefully. I'm by no means the only person making that. It really is a collective team making those decisions, and ultimately it's Sam, the CEO. But certainly take great responsibility in my role in these decisions.
Amazing. We're going to do a quick fire Mana round now. You're on the Searching for Mana show, so we ultimately want to find out what yours is. So you can answer these questions yes or no as quickly as you like, or elaborate as much as you want to. Is there a particular type of message or book that you recurrently go to for inspiration?
No, actually, I try to read a lot of fiction in the time that I have, just to like exercise the other part of my brain sometimes.
What's a great fiction book that you've read recently?
Just read Simone de Beauvoir's Woman Destroyed, actually. Very interesting tales.
We'll put that in the show notes. What is something that keeps you up at night at the moment?
Uh the right timing to aggressively deploy capital in this market,
Why so?
just in terms of opportunity cost, um, on how else we might deploy it versus actually valuations being quite reasonable at the time as well.
I know that absolutely everything you do is working incredibly hard the whole time, but outside of that, is there a particular, just to like give some examples, is there a particular thing that you do that's built into your habits that gives you energy or keeps you balanced? It could be kite surfing, it could be meditation in the morning, anything like that?
I skiing is my favorite activity in the world, so definitely I would say backcountry skiing.
If you were to be able to put a message onto whatever your favorite publication is, think of something like Forbes, Bloomberg, whatever it might be for you. You've got the front cover. Amy, what would the message be that you'd put on there?
Something probably like, take agency.
Love it.
Yeah. I think like I'll just give you an anecdote. One thing that I find myself talking about a lot, with FTX is people are like, "Oh, what do you think is going to create the next like mainstream adoption of crypto, etc." I'm like, "We're trying to create that. We take great responsibility. We think we have responsibility in creating that with our investments and also the products that we built. But you can apply that to so many elements of life.
So true. Absolutely love it. So finally, Searching for Mana show. Mana, just to clarify, in gaming, you've got your power, and then Mana is the magic. It could be sword fighting, running really quickly, being able to jump high. Amy, what's your Mana?
I'm a relationship builder.
Fantastic. Could you just expand on that a little?
Yeah, I've always been a very extroverted person, you know, um, and love getting to know people, getting to know and really building real relationships. One of the things that I think about even when going into a partnership, large or small, is can I trust this person? Am I feeling the right vibes? And then once we're a partner, like there's some partners that you have where you're like, this person is family. We're doing this work together beyond just the business relationship, and those are always the best. And I feel like I've always been very good at, but also naturally really enjoy building relationships.
Yeah, so important. All right, thank you. So we'll go now into the final part of the show where we talk about the horizon and perhaps your thesis. Ollie, back over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just to sort of segue on from that, you obviously talked about sort of relationship building and sort of, being an extrovert person, partnerships obviously being so crucial behind who you work with and who you back as well as an investor. Like when you're looking at a founder as someone, you might potentially back and sort of work with over, let's say 5, 10, 15 years as you are as a VC, like, what are the softer elements that you're looking for? What are the non-negotiables there? I appreciate you touched upon trust as as a key one. What else would you throw in there?
Yeah, I think a few things. Soft soft things that we're all constantly looking at. One is just drive. Like, why is the entrepreneur doing what they're doing? The path to a company's success is always peaks and valleys. I'm not sure there was a single like up and to the right company only like ever in history. Maybe there were, but like there's certainly that's like the absolute minority. And so how does that entrepreneur react during bad times, like hard times? And by the way, the entrepreneur should definitely stress test the same scenario with their investor as well. Why, let's say like in crypto, a lot of liquid exits happen early. Certainly in DeFi, right? And during DeFi summer, a lot of these DeFi founders came into a lot of wealth, liquid wealth, like fairly early before, they've even built too much product, I would argue. And then you saw a lot of them actually stop bringing it every day. and stop like innovating on products and really driving products. And so like an entrepreneur's drive has to be beyond just making money. It needs to be around like wanting to build something. I mean, I'm not saying like everyone's is, but I think from what we're looking for, like we want to back generational businesses. And that means like taking huge risks, like getting zeros, but like then you're capturing the founders that really build something absolutely special. So I think that's one of them. And then it's like around are they really great at convincing other people to believe in their vision, which is an absolute vital skill set, whether it is recruiting the top talent when you're about to give them like 20% of the offer Facebook is going to give them or less, right? Or raising capital, particularly in down markets, convincing partners to work with you and large Fortune 500 companies, whatever, to like be a beta customer, of your product, untested. All of that involves skill set, sales skills, and so like that kind of like magnetism, that one, like at least one of the founders and ideally the CEO has is really important. Then I would say lastly, it is this like factor around, do I want to work with this person over a several year period of time? And that's like there's trust in it. There's also like a personality fit and all the above. Like, I mean, some investors decide to be much more passive, and my style has always been like more hands-on, and so it's like there's definitely teams that I meet where I'm like, I think this company will actually do well, but life is too short to work with a team that you don't entirely vibe with. And so, and that would be like kind of like the last criteria.
Just to like riff back from what you were saying earlier about, feeling the responsibility to be as brilliant as possible, representing, females in this type of position. How are you seeing that in the crypto space from an investment perspective? Because what makes me think about this is you're saying a lot of it is, is the person backable because they've shown absolute appetite beyond just earning the money, and like, you can trust that they're generationally trying to build this product. There's this vibe that you get from you want to work with them. So therefore, like, if the predominant amount of venture capitalists are male, and they're also looking people from a particular background where most people who've operated are also male, I'm assuming that you're seeing a lot less candidates who you can back who are, from a diverse background, but female. And then how are you looking at adjusting this?
Yeah, it is a fact that there are really few female entrepreneurs and founders, and like even more so in crypto. When I find them, I'm thrilled, quite frankly, and I would say that like when you find the female entrepreneurs, it's not like they're any less, ambitious, or think differently than a male entrepreneur at all. And so I would say like there's nothing unfortunately we can do about the numbers. I really try to pay it forward and spend more time like sort of mentoring entrepreneurs who are female, just because I think they sometimes like could use that kind of extra push, like no, you actually have all of the ingredients here like your peers do, and go out and ask for higher valuation, or like go out and just like do this raise now. And you know with the opportunities that I can, like, definitely like to do that, and make the time for it, I would say. And yeah, where I find it kind of like in terms of the female entrepreneur pitching me, it is truly thrilling to find that, because it's pretty rare. There's just like much a fraction of them. And we're cutting this down like kind of like the female slice. I mean, if you look at kind of like underrepresented minority entrepreneurs, you see a similar trend as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's a lot of initiatives and funds that are trying to rep that, which is great to see. But it's interesting to think about it from a perspective of, how finite is the funnel versus actually how much is the decision making being affected by bias. And so
Yeah.
I was curious in that. I mean, your bias would not be actually potentially even equal, because you might see the female entrepreneur in crypto and gravitate to that just slightly more. And of course, I'm sure there's a way that you try and make sure that you're making a neutral decision on, how strong the opportunity is. But what I suspect is overall there's a bias going toward what looks like, the typical type of successful investment. And it's just how to get around that when the venture capital space is not sat equally.
Yeah. It's really true. I think it starts with actually like funds are making a mandate to have more female investors.
Yeah.
Like if you look at all the major generalist funds, they are all trying very hard to like diversify, because essentially people have a tendency to understand people who look and have a similar life experience as them, right? And so like that female investor will be able to seek out more female entrepreneurs potentially with kind of like unconscious bias even. And ultimately, examples of great success. I mean, when you look out and you see Elizabeth Stark and the success that she's had with the Lightning Network, I mean, it's inspirational for like a lot of people. And I mean, her gender has nothing to do with it, kind of like the force that she is in the industry. And so when we look at, for example, in the crypto hedge fund space, the fact that like Caroline Ellison, for example, is co-CEO of Alameda Research. She's actually one of the most influential crypto hedge fund managers in the space. And so, like I'm constantly talking about how amazing she is. And it really takes kind of like more of these stories, I think, to encourage others to pursue a similar, like more maybe like risk on path. And that's why I think like I love to be as vocal as possible. Like hopefully as I, find success, or I'm able to find, things that like launch things that we're doing well, invest in companies that do well, that other investors might be inspired to follow my path down crypto as well, who look more like me. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways to support that balance, but we're probably in reality very far from it.
Super interesting to hear, Amy. I just wanted to get some insight from you just with regard to now the series of value adds that you think a VC provides beyond sort of allocator of capital, and whether that's sort of pivoted now from Web3 investing to, maybe what it looked like 4 or 5 years ago across sort of Web2. Obviously, when you're competing for, I guess, in-demand businesses to go sort of lead those rounds as a VC, like wanted to get a feel for, what are those value adds that you perceive to be sort of most crucial? And you highlighted again that you're sort of very hands-on with those founders. But what sort of separates, the best from the good, I guess, in what is a super crowded venture capital landscape?
It's very competitive, and there's a lot of great investors out there. And so everyone sort of differentiates differently. And I would say when we say we are strategic, I mean, we mean it in a pretty deep way. So we have a lot of, I would say, sister resources at our disposal, right? Like in relationships. So firstly, the fact that like all of us on FTX Ventures are quite crypto native. Actually, I think the only person on FTX Ventures who is not an engineer and technical, right? And it's going to be somebody who's like, helping companies with BD, but everyone else on Ventures actually is helping, can build protocols, themselves, are pretty adept at like understanding kind of smart contract infrastructure, and actually plays a very active role in advising like product roadmap build out in our portfolio. We have the resources of FTX, right? Like FTX Ventures is a sister fund and a separate fund, but we have at our disposal, we can make warm introductions into the FTX listings team, for example, who is making their own entirely independent decision on listings, but still, we're able to like make the introductions. We're also able to make introductions to across, FTX is in 160 jurisdictions. We know investors, we are very deeply embedded in the ecosystems of all of those countries. And so able to really make connections to a company across the board there. Then we're also able to make connections with fellow market makers. And we're very close in partners with, for example, Jump Crypto, and also Alameda Research, and being able to talk to them and see whether there's interest in being a liquidity provider, for a certain application, a DApp, or building on top of a blockchain ecosystem and doing that together, are things that we're able to really do. We also have our own blockchain team, blockchain engineering team. So at times we will also build on top of, for example, a blockchain ecosystem as well. And so it is very holistic in terms of the value add that we like to bring. And so, yeah, really that we kind of try to live by that with all of our investments.
Super interesting. And then just to dive into some of those investments, I guess, you're obviously across gaming, you're across sort of various different other things across DeFi and sort of Web3 as a whole. Like, firstly, what specifics are you most excited by? And then also, I did also want to sort of get a feel on, you've obviously backed a number of different L1 players, quite a few sort of infrastructure and sort of cross-chain sort of players in there as well to bridge between different platforms there. And obviously, from that behavior, it looks like you perceive a landscape where there'll be multiple winners across different, maybe sort of sub verticals for those L1s. Wanted to get a wider feel on that vision as well.
Yeah, it's a lot of surface area. I'll say one area that I've been spending a lot of time on is the NFT space. We essentially like co-led the last round of Yuga Labs with Andreessen, and then also supported the community really in forming the DAO, ApeCoin DAO. And then, I serve currently on the board of the DAO. And so we've been really like very deeply like working with the team across a number of initiatives. And like kind of like at the same time, I've been also spending a lot of times with the other sort of blue chip and also emerging NFT projects as well, because I think it's one of the most interesting areas of development right now as these kind of early NFT brands, all of whom are no more than probably a year old for the most part, right? And some less than that, are deciding who they want to be. Do they aspire to be an entertainment company or a gaming company or a technology company, as some has decided? It seems like each one of them does really have like a pretty unique identity of product that they want to build, what they want to outsource, what they want to build in-house. At the end of the day, like, I believe these are valuable IP companies. And so now, like, in terms of the product that they decided to keep in-house versus, bring third party, like, each one kind of has their own path to doing so. We'll see how that goes. I think a lot of them aspire, when they think about like aspirational companies, like Disney gets brought up a lot. LVMH, I think like Yuga has kind of aspired to be some sort of blend of both, and I think I do believe that potentially a couple of like multi-billion-dollar consumer brands could be built from the NFT space, and it'll be really interesting to see who they are and also the path they take to go down.
And you also mentioned being like a board member of a DAO there. How does that sort of phenomenon and sort of the rise of DAOs, like how does that affect the psychology, I guess, of being an investor and a board member there?
Yeah, it's been a great learning opportunity. On the one hand, I am not sure I've actually seen a more passionate community than is the Bored Ape Yacht Club community. I mean, when it was first announced that I was like joining the special committee or the board, I think something like 2,000 Bored Ape Yacht Club members immediately followed me on Twitter. And the thing is, they do that with each other. It's not just with me, it's actually with each other. They're so closely connected. And then I went to Ape Fest every single day at NFT NYC because it was so fun. And they had so many different activities every day, and just like meeting community members and just hearing kind of like and experiencing their passion. That is the essence of the community. And we're trying to harness that, with the DAO. Now, like, I think the day-to-day is challenging, right? Because in terms of operating what is, I think, the most visible DAO currently in the world, or one of the most visible, you are balancing fairness and decentralization and truly like decentralized decision making with getting stuff done, essentially, right? So unlike other boards that I'm on, where we are quickly iterating and influencing and helping a CEO make decisions, we have a very administrative role actually on the ApeCoin DAO board. And I think that is a difference in role that a lot of community members don't understand. And so sometimes they get frustrated by the pace of like things getting done. And the reality is, if we were to actually take a more aggressive stance, it wouldn't be following the philosophy of the DAO. And also, I think, honestly, even from a compliance perspective, there would be issues as well, in terms of like, this DAO running, which launched a token, which is an autonomous organization, right? And so we're constantly managing all of those, I would say, like pressure points. And on top of all of that, because we're trying to bring a very democratic decision-making process, inevitably there is process involved with, for example, submitting a proposal and the amount of time people have to like review the proposal, comment, iterate, cycle through that. And as a result, I'll be first to say that I think the process around submitting grant proposals is pretty onerous and daunting for a lot of people. And so it's led to some frustration. I do think that we are getting a lot higher volumes now as people realize like, how they can get a grant from the DAO. But, these are all challenges that we're working through. But I would love to leave, I have a 6-month term there, right? And I may or may not be voted for another term. And, I would really like to leave a legacy of like smoothing out the process more, trying to really hear the community and actually like adding some value like to the community. And those are all things that all of us on that DAO board think about.
No, it's so interesting to sort of hear about that sort of slight pivot almost, I guess. From, let's think about like, of a Web2 company for a VC board member into that. Ultimately you've got a CEO sort of accountable and responsible for that company and sort of reporting into the board, versus that obviously is sort of almost administrative role that you've kind of got with DAO. It's like so interesting. What do you perceive to be the time frame, I guess, for mass sort of Web3 adoption? Like, we're obviously seeing more and more users come onto these different L1s, onto these different platforms.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question that everyone asks, and I think the time frame could be a couple of years. And I increasingly believe that it will be driven by incumbent players. So if I look out at, for example, some of the largest consumer internet companies, whether they're social networks or they're large gaming companies, there is no one who is not either actively experimenting or actively building in the Web3 space. And these are companies with really reach into the billions of people. And so like as they expose their customer and user base in tokens and NFTs, etc., then inevitably like orders of magnitude more people will suddenly be engaging in these for the first time. And it basically kind of begets the question of like, what's the L1 that's going to dominate? Like, what's the wallet that's going to dominate? Before, all of these products catered to a predominantly crypto native community. But in a world where that massively changes, like who actually owns that? Does Web3 sadly become more centralized again? Because actually the incumbents decide to build everything in-house. And so it's yet again a walled garden of, kind of pseudo Web3 products. I don't know. I think like it remains to be seen, but I do think that we're going to see, the incumbents coming in with some aggressive announcements. And we've actually announced our partnership with Reddit, which has over 400 million active users, which is a staggering number of users. They rolled out essentially like they put community points on chain as an ERC20 token and rolled that out to 2 subreddits, the Fortnite one and cryptocurrencies, 2 very active subreddits. And I mean, we just launched it with them with FTX Pay, and we're seeing kind of like over the next like few months what the reception looks like. The intent is actually to give more tools and capabilities to the community. So their communities will eventually be able to launch their own token on top of this platform, for example, and then kind of build utility, use it as they like. And so we think it's quite a decentralized approach. And so I think like other large companies will take other directions with their Web3 launches, and we'll see kind of what works.
Amy, without asking you broadly about the whole thesis, on that particular point, you just laid out what sounds like it could be the path to a mass adoption, which unfortunately would have more of a centralized feel to it. Within your thesis, are you taking agency to try and invest in the plays where it will be truly decentralized?
So I guess I am not a decentralization maxi. I believe in certain parts of it. For example, it is an incredible thing that data is democratized, right? With blockchain. So in a world where you don't, for example, actually know whether Twitter has deleted certain tweets, or banned certain tweets, or like if Meta has, banned certain individuals from posting. If these transactions one day are actually like on chain, anyone can actually see that. And that transparency of data, I think I do very much believe in. However, like around decentralized decision making, around and some other, kind of like types of when people say decentralization, I think I'm a lot more. I think it's like remains an early experiment and remains to be seen whether those are better models than we have today.
Like when you're talking through the difference of making decisions through the board of a DAO, and it sounds like that right now is such a time-consuming process and an administrative one, where if a few people have made decisions, and if there was weighting of decisions, it could be a slicker operation. So it sounds like the good work that you and others are doing will possibly create that scenario. But you might have scenarios where DAOs become very useful for certain types of things, I suspect, and like definitely not very useful for other things. So what we're looking at with the ledger is hopefully that's useful for everything, because there is then open data. We can see, decisions that have been made, but still for there to be in certain industries or elements of them, what would have been very similar to a Web2 company in your view?
Yeah, I think that a hybrid approach probably is the best. Like, so for example, some of the best things that came out of the 8 Coin DAO is when we constantly are reading through all the comments that community members are leaving, and it's fascinating. They have phenomenal ideas. They have really great insights and really great questions for proposals, criticism, I would say, and how do you harness that while still be able to do things like hire a team to actually essentially be able to do things like marketing and branding and outreach and some of these functions that don't involve actually critical business decisions that may well be put up to DAO vote, but actually can just make decisions like more fastly made. Like how do you balance that? I think like all those are interesting questions. Also, like from putting full data on chain, I would say that like no blockchain today in the world could actually, for example, run Twitter transactions as an example, right? And it's interesting to see what hypothetically in the next number of years, like how the infrastructure might develop so that one of them could. And that's why I think like, to your earlier point on like what's going on the L1 side, I think a lot of investors believe generally that we're in a multi-chain world. There are architecture decisions that blockchains make in which they makes them advantageous maybe in one area, one type of transaction, but disadvantageous with another. And so we do believe like while there are general purpose blockchains, that some amount of specialization will occur. And so we believe in a multi-chain world, and it will be interesting to see, like, for example, who unlocks and how they unlock the next 100x, throughput increase and transaction speed, and then at what cost of like decentralization or security, while also just kind of still maintaining, for example, like open data access. All of those will be really interesting to see over the next few years, I think, and I think that's why, like in the terms of the L1 wars, like you know certainly early emerging winners around Ethereum and then Solana as well. But it's an incredibly competitive space in L1 right now, and so I think the next couple of years will be pretty telling.
So we're looking at things and trying to make decisions based on, I suppose, what we suspect, but also maybe slightly what we hope things might look like in several years. If you go and read FTX Ventures, I don't know, thesis mandate, then certainly, you guys are trying to look at what are going to be generational businesses and therefore consider what the landscape might be in 7 to 10 years. Could you, with what you hope, describe that might look like?
Yeah, I think like the kind of the hope for a lot of us that it's going to be a paradigm shift like mobile has been, right? Several years ago, there were investors that specialized in mobile investments, and that seems pretty silly now since everything touches mobile at some point, whether you're a B2B enterprise company or a B2C, consumer internet company, and potentially that will be the same with crypto. I think this is not a new thesis. I think believers have long believed this, that that crypto rails could first and foremost power a large amount of traditional finance, maybe. I mean, there's extremely strong vested interest for that not to be the case, even though it's probably the best use case of the technology, around payment rails, for example, and what that could do with, like, for example, lowering costs for remittances and money transfers and all else. But obviously, it threatens like some pretty large incumbents in TradFi, and so that might be the last domino to fall, even though it's like the biggest impact. And in the meantime, the concept, I mean, first you have like, cryptocurrencies, the speculative asset class, and then you have potentially the form factor as like a means of like marketing and customer retention. I think will be embraced and is increasingly embraced by the largest brands in the world, and kind of like customer acquisition retention tools, because it's fun and different form factor, and it's conducive to tying it to perks and rewards. And I think, like, depending on how regulatory policies are laid out, how you define a security, or defining security in a way, a token is security in a way that allows teams to actually become compliant, will also unlock a lot more utility, whether that is rev share or royalties or a number of, kind of like mechanisms that really just aren't allowed today. I think so, essentially, like, the blockchain sort of infusing like different parts of categories in, our economy today. And that would really be terrific.
And so in finance, if that can happen, I think that makes an awful lot of sense. But when you think about an investment in, what has been some of the early NFT phenomena, which haven't been around for long, and in essence, they're saying we might be Disney. That's the play here. How is that possibly the play for a financial technology? Like, if it's okay, let's say we were disrupting auction houses, then the utility of the ledger makes some perfect sense. But if we're disrupting Disney, why would that be on the blockchain in 10 years?
I'm not sure that it's actually disrupting Disney at all. It's actually just another Disney, right? It's actually just the creation of what is in the next 2 decades, the next generation of $100 billion companies, or like, 10 to $100 billion companies. And what percentage of those might be Web3 native? I think that's the question. Not necessarily that it's going to replace Disney, because ultimately both companies are valuable IPs. One, significantly more mature than the other.
What percentage is it, Amy? Really, like, ridiculous question. You asked like the percentage of those companies that could be, in that $50 to $100 billion range in 10 years. What do you think it is?
I don't know. I would say, in the next like decade or two, like north of 10%. I mean, yeah, like incumbent companies stay incumbent. Like, if you look at who holds those ranks, those companies have been around for like decades, right? And so new entrants actually are pretty hard to come by. And so that's why it's like, I'm pretty bullish that like a number of them will be Web3.
Michael from Chainalysis said that in the next 5 to 10 years, there'll be a big shift. And then in 20 years, absolutely everything, 100% will be Web3. So you're not bullish. 10% from Amy.
I guess 10% specifically. It depends on the framing. Web3 native companies becoming like a 10 to 100, generational business, right? But if I think about in 10 to 20 years, like what percentage of those companies will be building products or have products on the blockchain? It could be. I would say probably the majority.
Perfect. All right. Well, Amy, your time's hyper precious. So thank you so much for talking so openly through those really interesting topics.
Thank you so much, guys.
We both only just got started there, so we'll set up another call where we can really go into what that piano career would have been. Amy, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate your time.